My parents spent a fortune planning a fairy tale wedding for my sister, lavish flowers, a string quartet, even fireworks over the bay. But when it came to my wedding, they didn't just decline to help. They refused to show up at all. On the morning of my ceremony, I called to ask where they were. My mother's words sliced through me. "Enjoy marrying your maid, we won't be embarrassed with you." I stood there in my suit phone, trembling in my hand, feeling like every wound from my childhood had been ripped open at once. And yet, instead of breaking down, I laughed. I sent them one single photo of my wife, and within minutes their phones wouldn't stop ringing, panic flooding every missed call. That was the moment everything turned upside down. I'm Zephyr, and this is my story. It's not easy to share, but I believe some of you will understand what it feels like to be cast aside by the people who should have loved you the most. I'm about to share something close to my heart. But before I do, can you say hi in the comments or tell me where you're from? I love hearing how far my story reaches. It's always good to know I'm not alone in this. Thank you. And now, let me tell you everything. And if my story resonates with you, please consider subscribing to this channel. Your support means more than you know. It helps me keep sharing these moments, and maybe it helps someone out there feel a little less alone. Before phones lit up with panic and before a single photo flipped my world, there was a quieter wound that never stopped bleeding. It opened again the night I stood on the balcony of my parents' cliff house in La Jolla, the Pacific chopping itself into bright shards below, while inside my mother rehearsed a press release disguised as family dinner. Vivian pointed her crystal flute at a mood board for Giselle's wedding, white orchids, a string quartet, a choreographed sparkler exit, and said, as if reading a family creed, "Our family must appear in spaces worthy of our name." She didn't look at me when she said it, which somehow made it worse. I kept my eyes on the water. Living above the ocean taught me the difference between spectacle and weather. One looks impressive, the other remakes the coastline. The old ache walked in and sat beside me uninvited, carrying the same two memories it always carried. First 16, a backyard celebration that felt like a meeting. I tore open a small envelope and pulled out a $75 gift card, then watched my sister be led laughing and crying to a red Porsche with a bow thick as a winter scarf. Roland clapped like a man closing a deal. Cameras flashed. I memorized the feeling of being both present and omitted. Second, UC San Diego, the day I stood at a podium and spoke as valedictorian while my father checked his watch. Halfway through the reception, he leaned in cologne and impatience and said, "Don't miss connections tonight," then left for a gala at the Hotel del Coronado. He called it philanthropy. I called it gravity. At dinner, Roland walked Dominic, Giselle's fiancé, through cap rates and luxury inventory as if they were private scriptures. I poured sparkling water, tasted nothing, and nodded when expected. When Vivian asked if I'd RSVP'd for the donors' brunch next weekend, I said I had work. She smiled like it was a misunderstanding that would resolve itself when I grew up. In the hallway, my graduation photo hung just slightly crooked. No one had noticed, or maybe they had and decided crooked was fine for me. I drove home to Ocean Beach and let the smell of salt and old wood do what it always did, quiet me. The library in La Jolla had been my sanctuary for years. But that night my oasis was a spiral notebook full of budgets and Keynesian marginalia. Numbers made sense. They held even when the story didn't. I balanced columns the way I tried to balance my life, rounding to the nearest whole when decimals threatened to spill. The envelope on my doormat bore my sister's handwriting and a wax seal that stuck to my thumb. Inside, a save the date stamped with the Palace of Fine Arts, all arches and mythology. September 3 in the afternoon, formal attire, black tie optional, but morally compulsory. I held the card up to the light and saw the watermark of our family's favorite illusion, permanence. If I ever get married, I wondered, would they show up for me? The question felt rhetorical, a trick prompt on an exam where the right answer humiliated you for hoping. My phone buzzed. The property manager said the irrigation on my tiny patio had blown a gasket and water was pooling into the downstairs neighbor's space. "Emergency cleanup," she said. "I'm sending someone." I stared at the save the date, at the glittering city on the card, then at the modest leak soaking into my concrete. Two kinds of floods. I dialed the number she gave me. A woman answered on the second ring, crisp and bright over the hum of a van. "Blaze Cleaning," she said. "This is Tori. Tell me what you're seeing." I told her about the water. I didn't know I was also calling something else in. Tori arrived in 15 minutes in a navy polo with Blaze cleaning stitched in white over her heart, dark hair in a knot, tool bag in one hand, a small moisture meter in the other. "You're Zephyr?" she asked, like the name made sense to her. She crouched by the patio door and ran a finger along the seam. "Your irrigation timer overshot," she said, glancing at my herb boxes. "Classic overwater. But the problem isn't you being careless. It's infrastructure. The system wasn't designed for a tenant who actually cares about basil." I laughed before I could help it. She knelt in the pooled water and walked me through her plan: contain, extract, dry, sanitize, each step clean and efficient like a chess player narrating openings. The machine whirred, the meter beeped, and she explained vapor pressure differentials with the casual fluency of someone who could also explain why a rook belongs on an open file. When I asked how she knew all this, she shrugged. "I like systems," she said, "and watching them work." I caught a sliver of a laminated card in her toolbox, a diagram of coordinated response teams and flow rates. She saw me looking and smiled. "Nash equilibrium," she said, like we were picking up a conversation we'd started years ago. "If every unit on this block coordinates water use, everyone wins. If even one defects, like an old timer overfiring, you get a mess. People blame the tenant. I blame the design." After the last pass, my place smelled faintly of citrus and clean slate. I asked if I could buy her a coffee as a thank you. "Bird Rock," she said, already rolling the cord. "They do an Americano that forgives long days." We walked to Bird Rock with the ocean pushing a salty breeze down the street, and I realized how rare it was for me to be relaxed in my own story. We sat near the window, 2 cups and a chess set between us, hers, a travel board with magnetic pieces that clicked into place like they'd been waiting. We talked Adam Smith and asymmetries, then drifted into Dune, trading favorite lines about desert and destiny until we were quoting like old friends. She asked about UCSD. I asked about her logo. "Cleaning," she said, "pays the bills and lets me build what I actually care about." When I tilted my head, she added, "A smart, closed-loop cleaning system. Minimal water. Sensors. Gray water recovery. I keep it small and quiet for now." There was a carefulness to the way she said it, a boundary around a secret that wasn't mine to pry open yet. At some point, she pulled a notebook from her bag and sketched a rectangle my balcony, then dotted little circles where moisture had pooled, annotating with arrows and tiny numbers. "It's not about wiping surfaces," she said. "It's about redesigning the flow. We waste 70%, we don't have to. Blame habits if you want. I blame systems." Something uncoiled in my chest. When you've lived your whole life as data to be interpreted by other people, meeting someone who reads the system, not the person, feels like walking out of a spotlight into daylight. I told her I was used to being measured against a scale I didn't choose. She stirred her coffee and said, "People are only seen fully when you take off the sorting glasses." I looked out at the street and said before I could edit myself, "I've worn those glasses my whole life and called them family." 5 hours passed without either of us naming the spell we were under. The receipt said so in blunt ink, 2 coffees, a croissant, time stamped across an afternoon we handed each other in pieces. When the sun bent low, we drove up to Encinitas and walked the bluff, the Pacific trading blues with the sky. She told me about volunteering in Chula Vista, teaching kids how to coax tomatoes from stingy soil, how to understand water as a living thing. "I worked in the valley for a while," she said, hands in her pockets. "Prototypes, pilots, the usual burn. After a certain point, I wanted to build something people could hold and say, 'This made my day less hard.' So I started small. Cleaning gave me an excuse to listen." I told her about the library in La Jolla, how paper and silence felt like mercy. I told her about the crooked frame, the Porsche, the gift card. She didn't pity me. She audited the system that produced it, and then she looked at me the way no one in my family ever had, like I was a person with inputs and outputs, not a liability in a suit. We stood at the rail while the water darkened. I realized I wasn't defending myself, not even a little. The armor I usually slept in felt unnecessary with her, as if she'd reached under it and turned something off that had been buzzing for years. When I got home, my apartment felt different, like she'd rerouted air. A text buzzed. A photo came through a napkin from Bird Rock, sketched with a compact loop collection tray, microfilter sensor array labeled in tidy print, "Balcony Pilot." Another text. Let me try something. I promise no mess, only data. I stared at the drawing at the tiny arrows like currents finding new paths and typed back before fear could draft my reply. Yes. Come by this weekend. I set the napkin next to my sister's save the date and stood there for a long time looking from arches built for spectacle to lines drawn for function. One said, "Be seen." The other said, "Be changed." Somewhere between them I felt the first tremor of a life that might finally belong to me. The night I brought Tori to La Jolla felt like walking a tightrope over the Pacific, glittering from a distance, unforgiving up close. The house threw light across the lawn like it wanted the whole cliff to know who owned the view. We stepped into the dining room and right away the choreography faltered. The table was set for 8 crystal catching the chandelier, but there wasn't a chair for Tori. Vivian blinked as if startled by the existence of another human being at the threshold of her perfect tableau. "Oh," she said, and motioned for the housekeeper to fetch a spare from the kitchen, the kind that sat too low and didn't match. When it arrived, she placed it half an inch off the rug's border, a small misalignment that landed like a verdict. Roland launched into a monologue about absorption rates and trophy properties before we'd unfolded our napkins. He spoke past Tori the way you speak past a coat rack. Dominic, slick as a magazine ad, poured himself a heavy drink and told Giselle about a family fund in Palm Springs that was printing returns on boutique resort debt. "Short duration, high yield," he said, tapping the glass. "You just need the right connections." Giselle laughed on cue. I folded the monogrammed P on my lap so I wouldn't tear it. When the amuse-bouche arrived, Vivian turned to me with a smile that slid like oil. "Zephyr. Dear, no photos tonight, all right? My friends follow me. Let's avoid confusion." I watched Tori absorb the sentence with a calm that made me ache. She reached for water and listened to Roland compare waterfront setbacks in La Jolla and Newport as if reciting scripture. Then she set down her glass and asked politely how he managed groundwater mitigation on his coastal sites. With sea rise projections tightening, she said the risk models must be evolving. The table paused. Roland blinked. Dominic cleared his throat. Giselle changed the subject to her dress fittings at a boutique in Union Square. I could feel myself slipping back into the old role, the son who must stabilize the room no matter what it costs him. The boy who translates microaggressions into a language that won't ruin the evening. Tori's hand found my knee under the table. "Breathe," she whispered so quiet I nearly believed I imagined it. Dessert never arrived. Roland called an early night for a tea time at Rancho. In the foyer, he clapped Dominic's shoulder and said, "We'll do 18 tomorrow, sort out that partner list. No invitation for me." Vivian looped her arm through Giselle's, and with surgical cheer added, "And darling, until things are official, let's keep couples photos to a minimum. Perception is currency. I tasted metal." Tori thanked her for dinner in a voice so even you'd think she hadn't been seated on a chair that made her knees higher than the table. Rancho Santa Fe was all cropped lawns and quiet money. Roland and Dominic disappeared to golf, leaving me and Tori on a patio where lemon trees pretended not to listen. Vivienne floated by long enough to mention that some of her friends had concerns about my decisions, and that discretion online would do us all good. She patted my arm like I was a tangle she could smooth. When she was gone, Tori leaned back and squinted at the horizon. "They build their world like a spreadsheet," she said. "Every cell formatted, every column justified. But people don't live in cells." I wanted to say I knew, but what I knew more precisely was how a person gets measured anyway. Back in Encinitas that evening, Tori made tea in her small, immaculate kitchen. Her apartment was the opposite of La Jolla shelves of dog-eared philosophy and field manuals, a work table lined with sensor modules and little cartridges, labeled in sharp handwriting, a whiteboard covered in flow diagrams. "Closed loop, minimal waste," she said, seeing me read the schematics. "Less water, more intelligence. Clean shouldn't mean disposable." She set a mug in front of me, then pulled a shortcake from the oven like it was the most normal thing in the world to follow 1,000 small humiliations with strawberries. I got up to refill our cups and opened the fridge without thinking. A postcard caught my eye, pinned with a magnet shaped like a droplet, Water Efficiency Summit Del Mar across the top. the EcoFlow Innovations logo in the corner, a list of speakers in a neat column. Halfway down, I saw her name. I stared long enough for the kettle to click. "Cake first," she said suddenly at my shoulder, and with a light sweep of her fingers, she closed the door. "You'll like it better warm." She smiled, and the matter was settled. Not hidden, not explained, simply set aside like a gift, not yet mine to open. On our way out later, she paused at the table strewn with modules and held up a tiny sensor between forefinger and thumb. "Don't let anyone else calibrate your scale," she said. "Start at home." The sentence landed where years of advice had missed. In my family, I was always an index to be compared against a market I hadn't chosen. With her, I could imagine setting my own baseline. As we pulled up to my place, my phone buzzed. A text from Gideon, my father's older brother, the only person in that house who ever bothered to look me in the eye and wait for the real answer. If the day comes, his message read, "I'll walk with you." I stared at the words as if they might rearrange into something less generous. Tori glanced over. "Everything okay?" "Yeah," I said, "just someone remembering me." I tucked the phone away and wondered what day he meant and whether it was already on the calendar. It happened on a Saturday, the color of new copper. Tori said she wanted to go to Balboa Park, which made sense. She loved systems and nature, and the park had both museums and water and trees that had learned how to be magnificent without begging for attention. She led me to a flame tree near the botanical building, a canopy so bright it seemed to be lit from within. For a second, I thought she was adjusting her shoe. Then she knelt. The world narrowed to the sound of my breath and the grain of the ring box. "I don't have a cathedral," she said, a little breathless, "but I have this tree and everything I know about you." She opened the box. A ring of jade and small diamonds caught the light like a tide. "Will you build a life with me, one we design ourselves?" My throat closed. I nodded. It wasn't graceful. She laughed and slipped the ring on my finger, and the park applauded without looking. Birds breeze a toddler clapping for his own reasons. We sat on the grass with paper cups of coffee and said reckless, careful things, how I was afraid of becoming an exhibit in my parents' museum of appearances, how she feared that what she was building would be evaluated only by who recognized it first. "We'll marry on our terms," she said, squeezing my fingers. "We'll throw a small wedding with real people. And real food," I added, "and no speeches that sound like quarterly reports." She snorted coffee out her nose and had to borrow my napkin, which felt like a blessing disguised as a mess. At Bird Rock, Maya screamed when she saw the ring and hugged me so hard my ribs complained. "About time," she said, then looked me dead in the eye. "Listen to me, Z. Your parents don't get to define your marriage. If they show up with conditions, the RSVP is no. We split a muffin 3 ways like a promise." I took a photo of my hand because she insisted, then deleted it because I wasn't ready to share a thing that felt too newly alive. Back at my apartment, I opened my laptop and drafted an invitation. We chose Balboa Park at 3 in the afternoon, a guitarist instead of a band. Wildflowers in mason jars, lanterns for after. Tori said she'd make a cake because she didn't trust fondant, and I said I didn't trust speeches. We made a guest list that fit at a long table without microphones. I typed my parents' names last. My finger hovered over send. "We should tell them," I said, "even if it's an exercise in futility." Tori rested her chin on my shoulder. "Tell them the truth," she said. "Then we'll tell our truth with or without them." Before I could send, her phone rang. She excused herself to the balcony. Through the glass, I heard only the rhythm of her voice, a shock, a soft laugh, the precise questions of a person who takes notes with her mind. When she came back, and her eyes were bright. "Del Mar," she said. "The summit. They're structuring a growth round 6 million. They want me to lead the pilot for municipal adoption." She sat down like she was resisting the urge to float to the ceiling. I felt pride expand in my chest so fast it hurt. "Is this what you want?" I asked. "Only if I can still build it the way it should be built," she said, "without shaving off the part that matters." I kissed her and told her I loved the part that mattered. I hit send on our invitations and watched the little paper airplane skitter across the screen. Almost immediately, an alert banner slid into view from my email, a newsletter announcing Giselle's engagement party at a hotel in the marina, RSVP capped at 250 media partners listed in a plump row. The invite itself arrived a minute later, embossed with a schedule that read like a parade champagne tower strings rooftop spark. I stared at the two emails side by side, one small, one grand. One built for attention, one built for belonging. Vivian's text followed with the precision of a metronome. Plan whatever you like, dear. Your father and I will be at a gala that evening. Proud of you for taking the initiative. I stared at the sentence until the words lost meaning. Proud of you for taking the initiative. It read like the note you send a junior associate who finally learns how to book a conference room. Tori took my phone, read it, and handed it back with a soft shake of her head. They don't have to see you for you to be real, she said. You do. I slipped the ring off to rinse a coffee cup and almost dropped it into the sink, which felt like a metaphor too on the nose to be allowed. So I laughed and set it down carefully on the counter. I tucked a flame tree leaf into my wallet like a talisman. In the evening light, the green looked almost like a living thing pressed into the leather. Later, when I was alone, I opened a blank document and typed the names of everyone who loved us without a ledger. Maya Gideon, the friends who came to potlucks, the neighbor who watched my cat without keeping score. I wrote my parents' names at the bottom and let them sit there the way a late assignment sits on the edge of a desk waiting to be noticed. Then I closed the laptop and stood by the window. The ocean made its patient case. Somewhere far off, fireworks practiced for someone else's party. My phone buzzed on the counter with a new message I didn't yet read. My finger traced the ring on my hand. I thought of the tree, how it didn't ask permission to bloom. The night before my wedding, I dialed my mother, hoping against reason that some part of her would relent, that maybe there was a corner of love left in the house on the cliff. When she answered, her tone was already sharpened. I told her the ceremony was tomorrow, that it would mean everything if she and my father came. She sighed as if I had asked her to carry a burden. Enjoy marrying your cleaner, she said, crisp and cold. We won't be embarrassed with you. The line went dead before I could form a reply. My phone slipped from my hand and I folded forward on the couch in my small Ocean Beach apartment, the weight of her words pressing me down. The silence that followed was heavier than any storm I had known. Morning broke soft and golden, but inside me everything trembled. I dressed with hands that wouldn't stop shaking. When I looked in the mirror, I barely recognized the man staring back, a groom without his parents. At Balboa Park, the guests gathered among the gardens, faces, warm voices carrying kindness. Gideon appeared beside me, steady as a pillar. I'll walk you in, he said, offering his arm. For the first time that day, I could breathe. We stepped forward together, and when the music began, the people rose to their feet. They clapped as if to fill the empty space left by the two chairs in the front row, polished and waiting but never touched. Those empty chairs shouted louder than applause ever could. The ceremony itself was stitched together with love in its simplest forms, wildflowers gathered from local fields, acoustic guitar notes drifting like a gentle tide, paper lanterns swaying in the breeze. It was the opposite of Giselle's spectacle, and yet it was whole. When I looked at Tori, her eyes carried every answer I had spent my life searching for. I said my vows with a voice that broke in the middle, not from doubt, but from the sharp truth that family can choose absence as easily as presence. At the reception, friends raised glasses and shared stories, their laughter creating a shelter around me. But my phone buzzed again and again. Roland's name lit the screen 30 times, the same call repeated as if repetition could undo their refusal. Texts followed, call us back. Answer, we need to talk. I slid the phone face down on the table, the vibration rattling like an uninvited guest. Maya leaned close and whispered, when the truth comes out, those chairs will be proof. They'll have to live with what they missed. Later, Tori touched my arm, her expression serious. She held up her phone. They saw the photo, she said quietly. On her screen was my earlier post, Tori standing at a conference booth beneath a banner that read, Tori Blaze, CEO, EcoFlow Innovations. I had uploaded it without thinking, a casual glimpse of pride, and now it had found its way back to the people who had called her a cleaner. The irony tasted bitter. The calls were not born of regret. They were born of recognition. As we cut the cake, another message arrived, this one from Dominic, congratulations. Hopefully your little wedding gets press one day too. The smirk hidden in the words was impossible to miss. I tucked the phone into my pocket and watched my sister's husband sip champagne, blind to the cracks forming beneath his own empire. I felt the faint chill of foreshadowing, though I didn't yet know how deep his fall would be. When the music quieted and the lanterns flickered against the night sky, I stood back for a moment, watching everyone I loved gathered close, and then let my eyes fall again on the two empty chairs. Gideon raised his glass. "Son," he said, "today I am your witness. You are complete, even without them." His words filled the silence my parents had left behind. I swallowed hard and whispered back, "Maybe the only way they'll ever see me is if I show them the truth." Later, alone at our table, I turned my phone face up again. 30 missed calls glowed on the screen, each one colder than the last. My chest tightened. The time for pretending was over. The real confrontation was coming. Big Sur held us close during our honeymoon waves, crashing against the cliffs like drums, the redwoods whispering old secrets. In the quiet cabin, Tori and I shared coffee and newsprint, our names printed in the San Diego Business Journal. The headline praised EcoFlow as a breakthrough in sustainable design, calling Tori the UC Berkeley engineer changing the way California uses water. I beamed with pride, but before we could savor it, my phone rang. Roland's voice spilled out, urgent and rehearsed. "We need to meet." A week later, we sat across from my parents at George's at the Cove. They had chosen the terrace as if ocean views could soften what they had done. Roland wore his finest suit. Vivian glowed in pearls. Between them on the table sat a neatly wrapped package. They slid it across, unveiling a crystal vase that sparkled in the sun. "A wedding gift," Vivian said, smiling thinly. "Better late than never." They praised Tori with words that sounded like citations: innovative, visionary, impressive. Then Roland leaned forward. EcoFlow could be the perfect partner for Prescott Properties. Together we can repair what needs repairing. I listened, my chest tightening with something like rage disguised as clarity. "You're not here because you regret missing my wedding," I said, each word deliberate. "You're here because you regret misjudging Tori." Their silence was confirmation enough. I pushed back from the table, the vase catching the sunlight like a trophy no one deserved. I took them to Encinitas, to our modest apartment where books and blueprints outnumbered ornaments. I wanted them to see the world we had built without them. "You didn't lose me because of Tori," I told them in the kitchen, the crystal vase unopened at my feet. "You lost me because of your choices." Tori stood beside me, calm as ever. "They only see value when it's printed in the paper," she murmured, just loud enough for me to hear. Before they could reply, the doorbell rang. Giselle stood there with 3 suitcases and eyes red from crying. "I have nowhere else," she whispered. Dominic's schemes had finally snapped, the Ponzi unraveling under the spotlight of federal investigators. Her perfect life had collapsed into headlines no one wanted. She stepped into my living room and set down her luggage, and with it the last illusion that money could insulate anyone from consequences. That same evening I pulled up public filings and saw the truth myself. Prescott Properties under federal review numbers, bleeding debt hidden in corners, now lit up. The empire of glass and granite was cracking. Roland's face went pale as I laid the reports on the table. For once he had nothing to say. Vivian, immaculate, always broke down in tears. "We made mistakes," she said, voice breaking, "but you have to save this family." The plea hung in the air like smoke. For years I had wanted nothing but their recognition. Now, standing in my own home, I realized recognition was the last thing I needed. What I wanted was freedom from their ledger, from their conditions, from their control. My phone buzzed again. It was Dr. Patel reminding me of my therapy session. His voice echoed in my memory. "You can love your parents without letting them define you. Only then will you be free." I looked at the crystal vase still in its box, unopened and unwanted. Outside, the night pressed in, the waves audible even this far inland. I stepped onto the balcony, the salt air biting my skin. Below, the streetlights stretched into distance. I knew what was coming. A choice waited for me: to shield them from the collapse they had built, or to let the truth crash through and leave them to reckon with the wreckage. For the first time in my life, I leaned toward the second. The night pressed against the windows like a verdict. In our small Encinitas apartment, every light was on, though it did nothing to soften the weight in the room. My parents sat stiff on the couch, Giselle hunched between them, Tori by my side. It felt less like a family gathering and more like a tribunal where the accused and the accusers shared the same blood. The silence before the first word was louder than any storm. Roland finally broke it. "Zephyr, this can't go on. Prescott Properties is under siege and EcoFlow could be the answer. We need Tori to work with us or everything collapses." His voice was the polished steel of a man who had negotiated his whole life, now rattling for the first time. Giselle's shoulders shook. "Dominic's gone," she said, words catching on tears. "The resorts, the investments, everything was smoke. The funds are frozen. Reporters won't stop calling." She looked at me, eyes red, stripped of the glamour she had always worn like armor. I don't know where else to go. I turned to my parents. "You had no trouble attending her engagement party. You had no trouble raising glasses to Dominic. But when I asked you to come to my wedding, you couldn't be bothered. 2 empty chairs. Do you remember them?" Vivian flinched. "We couldn't risk the family's reputation," she said quickly, as if rehearsed. "We couldn't stand behind a cleaner at the altar stop," I said. My voice cut through her words. "Those empty chairs will never be forgotten. You taught me that value lies in who sits at the table, but your absence taught me something greater. I don't need you there to be whole." I pulled my phone from my pocket, opened the article, and read aloud. "Tori Blaze, CEO of EcoFlow Innovations, revolutionizes water systems for California communities." I held up the screen so they couldn't look away. "This is the woman you called a cleaner. This is the person you dismissed." The room quivered under the truth. Roland's hand trembled against his knee. Before they could speak, I dropped a file onto the coffee table. It was the federal report Prescott Properties flagged for dangerous financial maneuvers, loans stacked like a house of cards, partners withdrawing. "You gambled with more than money," I said. "You gambled with people's lives. And you expect me to clean it up." Tori stepped forward, her voice steady. "For the record, I was offered a seat at a major development firm in San Jose, a project worth more than Prescott will ever see again. I walked away from it. I wanted to build something real, something grounded. I chose Zephyr, and I chose this life. That's the only calculation that matters to me." The door opened quietly behind us. Gideon walked in, his face drawn but resolute. He looked at my father first, then at me. "If this goes to court," he said, his voice carrying the calm of a soldier, "I will testify." I saw the books. I saw the shortcuts. It's time the truth comes out, no matter who it hurts. Roland's jaw locked, his lips pressed tight, but no words came. Vivian's composure cracked, tears spilling down her cheeks as she whispered, "We only wanted to protect the family name." I shook my head. "The name means nothing without love. And you never gave me that." The image of those empty chairs surged in my mind louder than ever. I turned toward the balcony, opened the door, and let the night air rush in. The sound of waves carried through the silence like a benediction. I drew in a long breath. The path ahead was sharp and certain. There was no turning back. At Big Sur, the ocean roared against the cliffs like it was rewriting every wound I had carried. Tori and I sat outside our cabin, blankets pulled tight, speaking not of wealth or reputation, but of what mattered, building a scholarship for students who worked as hard as I once had. The news followed us. Prescott Properties under investigation. The La Jolla mansion up for sale. Giselle living in our spare room, learning humility one chore at a time. When my parents finally asked to meet at George's, they came smaller, stripped of grandeur. My father admitted he had been wrong. My mother, trembling, confessed she wanted a chance to change. I told them I would only accept their presence if it was real, not transactional. Back home, Giselle admitted she had envied my freedom and wanted to begin again. Tori returned with news EcoFlow had won Mission Bay, proof the future belonged to us. That night, hand on her stomach, I listened to the steady surf and knew happiness was mine, born of truth, not their approval.